everyone. Happy New Year. So glad to have you here tonight. 2024 was a year of tremendous growth and adventure for Mama. We had hoped to have chapters in 6 states by the end of the year. Instead, we now have 28 chapters in 17 states. Mama helped two nation-leading bills to protect kids online get passed into law in New York. And through this Expert Insight series, we have brought you ideas and information from experts ranging from Jonathan Haidt to the New York City Health Commissioner to several Meta whistleblowers and more. To kick off the year, I really wanted to express my gratitude to the incredible people who have made Mama's success possible. Our chapter leaders, which are people all over the country who have come forward to help lead the Mama movement. Mama's incredible team who work behind the scenes to manage what really is a daily tsunami of requests and challenges that come with building a thriving but still very young organization. And all of our incredible donors who are generous and care so much about keeping kids healthy and safe, who have made all of our work possible. For tonight's edition of Mama's Expert Insight series, I'm delighted to bring you a conversation with a scholar who is incredibly special for a variety of reasons. Meredith Broussard not only knows how technology shapes human experience and the roles that humans play in shaping the technology, but she excels in explaining technological complexities in ways that are really easy and fun, actually, to understand. She also holds the answer for how we could all reduce the headaches involved in repairing household appliances, which I will get to later in the show. Meredith is a data journalist. She is an associate professor at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute of New York University. She's a research director at the NYU Alliance for Public Interest Technology, and she's the author of several books, which we're going to talk about tonight. Her academic research focuses on artificial intelligence and investigative reporting and ethical AI, with a particular interest in using data analysis for social good. She appeared in the 2020 documentary Coded Bias, which was an official selection of the Sundance Film Festival and nominated for an Emmy Award and an NAACP Image Award. She has held prestigious fellowships, published in many prominent news organizations, and my favorite detail from her biography is that she has worked as a software developer at AT&T Bell Labs. Meredith, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Julia, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
So the focus of tonight's conversation will be artificial intelligence and computers. But before I start asking you to describe those and the problems with those, I really want to talk about your love of technology. Can you tell me why you became a programmer and what you enjoy about tech?
Well, literally the first line of artificial intelligence is I love technology. I love building things. I am an applied computer scientist, and I just have always loved building things. I've been coding since I was about 11. And what I do in my books is I build technology, but then I also write about why I'm building it, and I unpack or reverse engineer technologies that other people have made. So I'm really invested in explaining technology in plain language so that we can bring more people into important conversations about technology and democracy, or technology and its role in our culture. And I feel like this is particularly important given the rise of AI.
Can you also share a little bit about how you got into data journalism and what exactly that is?
Sure. So data journalism is the practice of finding stories in numbers and using numbers to tell stories. So I started my career as a computer scientist. I quit to become a journalist, and then I discovered that I could actually combine both. And I could be a data journalist. So sometimes I build code in order to investigate social problems. Other times I look at other people's code in order to uncover the problems embedded in their algorithmic systems.
So, your book, Artificial Intelligence: How Computers Misunderstand the World, I think should be required reading for absolutely everyone, as it does a truly brilliant job of breaking down exactly why computers should not replace humans. And I don't use that word lightly. In a minute, I'm going to share something in that how something in that book directly contributed to why I started Mama. But before I do, can you share a little bit about the hackathons that you describe in the book that you used to participate in and sort of the spirit of startup culture?
Yeah, so I'm very excited to hear the story about Mama, by the way. And One of the things I write about in artificial unintelligence is the time that I participated in a hackathon on something called the Startup Bus, which was a bus there were actually a couple of buses, but I was just on one. It's careening around the country kind of blindly. And you were supposed to form a team on the bus and make a startup idea and then pitch it in, I think, Nashville, which was where all of the buses ended up. And so I had wanted to write about hackathons in general because people on the outside think that hackathons are like these hotbeds of innovation and people have all these great ideas. And actually, what happens at hackathons is that people just make friends. It's a social event, and also there's a lot of recruiting that happens, right? So there aren't that many groundbreaking ideas that have come out of hackathons. So I found the looniest one that I could and participated in it. I packed a lot of Dramamine and got on the bus, and we built an app to calculate how much pizza you need for a pizza party. Because my friends and I had pizza parties with our toddlers, and doing the pizza math was always kind of complicated.
Whenever it comes to technology, it seems like for a long time now. I'm thinking about the film Metropolis from the 30s. Humans have always sort of like had this mythological idea about it. And certainly we love to use it, and we've kind of become obsessed with it or addicted to it in our society. Back in 1992, the media critic Neil Postman published a book called Technopoly: The Surrender of Culture to Technology. And it kind of is funny now to remember that this was really before even the internet was widely used. It was before Blackberries. But nonetheless, Neil defined technopoly as a society that no longer merely uses technology as a support system, but instead is shaped by it with radical consequences for the meanings of politics, art, education, intelligence, and truth. And, I think that holds true even more today. Since that time, folks have used a variety of words to describe sort of a techno-saturated culture. We've seen the rise even of techno-utopias, which are people that believe tech is better than humans, and it'd be great if we sort of hand it all over to the robots. But in your book, and this is what influenced me to think about Mama, you named something that is techno-chauvinism. Can you define techno-chauvinism for everyone?
Yeah, techno-chauvinism is the idea that technology is superior, the technological solutions are superior to others. And what I argue instead is that we should think about using the right tool for the task. Because sometimes the right tool for the task is absolutely a computer. And sometimes the right tool for the task is something simple like a book in the hands of a child sitting on a parent's lap. One is not inherently better than the other. And then when you unpack the idea that technology is superior, you see that it traces back to a very small and homogeneous group of people who are, trained as mathematicians and physicists. And what they're really saying is that math is superior to everything else. And thus the people who do computer science, who do math, are superior to other people. And this is not the society that I think we want to be living in.
It seems like there's a gendered aspect of that name. Is that intentional?
100%. There is an extraordinary amount of gender bias in Silicon Valley, even today. They have, to their great credit, moved the needle a tiny bit, but not very much. One of the reasons I left uh, technology as a field is because I had the experience that many, many women have, where I felt edged out of a STEM career. Like I felt that gender bias really concretely. I feel really lucky to have gotten back into STEM, albeit through a different channel.
Um, there continues to be a disproportionate number of men in leadership positions at these technology companies. Um, that's an ongoing issue. In your book, you were describing some projects that really seemed fun for everybody. Like, anybody like you, who meaning someone who likes to build things, enjoys these projects. And one of them was creating a self-driving vehicle. Can you tell us about that? And can you tell us why in that book, which came out, before Waymo was operating on the public streets of San Francisco and a couple other cities, you concluded that self-driving vehicles can never be completely safe for humans. How come?
Well, this dates back to the very earliest moments of self-driving vehicles. I happened to ride in a prototype. So self-driving cars were initially a project that was funded by DARPA. There was this $1 million challenge that if you could build a self-driving car, a robot car that could navigate through a an obstacle course, your team could win $1 million. And so, lots of people who were robot obsessed tried to build a car like this. It seemed like a fun challenge at the time. But I rode in one of these prototypes and it almost drove straight into a kind of concrete wall. And I thought, okay, well, if these engineers are so cavalier with my life, with their own lives, I don't really trust them to make a machine that is safe to be out on the roads because driving is something that humans are really good at because we are great at dealing with unpredictable situations. Computers are really good at dealing with predictable situations. And the idea of a self-driving car is that you can map out the whole world. You can map out all of the or record and predict all of the situations that are going to happen. And, if you do that, then yeah, you can build a vehicle that navigates through a defined space. But the world is anything but defined. I mean, think about all the weird stuff that you have seen or that has happened while you're driving. Like for me, I think about the time that a moose walked into the middle of the road. I was like driving down this like twisty mountain road in Vermont. All of a sudden, there's huge. It's like, what is going on? Never thought about a moose being in the middle of the road. And those programmers of self-driving cars are also not thinking about the moose in the middle of the road, right? So the unexpected is not something that computers are really good at dealing with. The other thing that I think about when I think about self-driving cars is I think about school buses, right? So, you know how when you put your small child onto a school bus, you worry about your small child being on the school bus and you worry about accidents. Okay, so then I think about, all right, my small child is out there in a school bus and there's a self-driving car that is really badly programmed that is, sharing the road with the school bus. Or I think about the lawlessness that would result on a school bus that had no driver. And I think about the crashes that would result, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, we're going to talk about risk in a minute, but my car that I drive came with software that I didn't know it had until I was making a turn and the car braked, even though I didn't touch the brake, and it caused me to jerk. I had my seatbelt on, but I later discovered there was a sensor that thought this person was crossing and it was just a shadow. It was just light. And so the car almost caused an accident because the software had been programmed to perceive it a certain way. It's really
Mhm.
dangerous. And what you said earlier about the unpredictability of humanity and people reminds me a lot of the work of Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning psychologist. I mean, to vastly oversimplify his work, he recognized that humans are irrational and unpredictable and filled with bias. And that idea was actually at the heart of your latest book, More Than a Glitch. Can you tell us about why you wrote that?
Sure. More Than a Glitch is about confronting race, gender, and ability bias in tech. And I wrote it because I went on the road after Artificial Unintelligence came out in 2018. And people would often ask about chapter 6, which is called People Problems. And so in that, I trace the history of many of the dominant ideas about technology, and I trace them back to, as I said before, a small and homogeneous group of people. One of the people I'm really fascinated by is Marvin Minsky, who's often considered the father of artificial intelligence. He was also closely associated with Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he did some amazing things. He did some problematic things. And so people would, as I was on the road, people would ask about the roots of very human problems inside our technological systems. And so I decided to dig more into that, to look at the ways that racism, gender bias, ability bias are all embedded in the algorithmic systems that increasingly people are looking to govern our world. And I
In your
just I
chat.
just don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, all media has inherent biases. This medium that we're using tonight means that people are not actually in the room with us, and in-person conversations create an array of sort of sensory experiences that are just completely flattened on the screen. So, of course, it makes sense that in this technology, it would be no different and that it would also have biases. In your chapter on machine bias, you describe one of the major applications of AI machine is to take a bunch of historical data and instruct a computer to make a model. The model is a mathematical construct that allows us to predict patterns in the data based on what already exists. Because the model describes the mathematical patterns in the data, patterns that humans can't easily see, you can use that model to predict or recommend something similar. But predictions aren't always accurate, right?
Absolutely. So the example that I usually turn to when I think about this is I think about the example of mortgage approval algorithms. So banks really like to take all your information and run it through an algorithm in order to decide if you are credit worthy. And as we know, getting a mortgage, a home loan, is one of the largest purchases that many people will make in their lifetimes. And owning a home is a major way of growing and building intergenerational wealth. Well, the markup went and examined automated mortgage approval algorithms and found that they were 40 to 80% more likely to deny borrowers of color as opposed to their white counterparts. And in some metro areas, this disparity was greater than 250%. Right? So we can look at what happened there. Well, the mortgage approval algorithm, when the folks built it, what they did is they took historical data on who had gotten mortgages in the past, fed it into the computer, and said, "Computer, make a model." And then they used that model to predict who would be a good credit risk for a mortgage in the future. Well, what do we know about the history of the US and lending? Well, we know that there's been financial discrimination. We know that there has been residential segregation. We know that there has been redlining. So the historical patterns of inequality are embedded in that data, and then they get replicated. And lots of people say, okay, well, can't you just feed in better data and then you would get a better outcome? And yes, like you do get more accuracy when you feed in improved data. But the problem is with mortgages, there is no such thing as a better world in which financial discrimination has not happened, right? And so
There is no better
this
data.
this is the essential problem that we face every time we make an algorithm.
Well, so the problems are baked into the product, but in your book, you identify a second closely related problem, which is actually the same thing that society experienced with social media. What is the black box problem?
Well, these algorithms are black boxes, and we call them black boxes. We refer to them as impenetrable because it's really hard to talk about math, right? Like you and I could have a conversation about math, but first we would have to kind of figure out what mathematical knowledge each of us has. And this was actually one of the hardest things that I discovered when I started writing about technology, which is that it is really difficult to write about mathematical concepts or high-level computational concepts without using jargon, right? So a concept like recursion is, it's a really useful word because it explains this computational process. But in order to explain recursion, I need to use a whole bunch of, and like, it's not actually useful. Like, we're going to get derailed in our conversation if I start trying to explain recursion. So, we talk about algorithms as if they're black boxes, and tech companies, developers, programmers have a vested interest in all of us thinking that these are impenetrable black boxes because then they can charge more money. They can say, "Oh, you wouldn't understand. It's technology inside there. You are not smart enough to understand. You need to trust me. I'm going to build this thing and it's going to be great." And that's not so fantastic, right? Because we all have unconscious bias. We're all working every day to become better people, but we're not there yet. And our unconscious biases are unconscious. We can't see them, right? So developers embed their unconscious biases in the products that they create. When you have a place like Silicon Valley that has a very homogeneous workforce, the collective blind spots of this community get embedded in the products. And that's why we have things like, AI systems rolling out that hallucinate, that have biases, that make problematic decisions.
Well, a black box means that we can't see into it. And so we don't know what the algorithms are doing. We don't always see the data sets that they're being trained on, and we don't know what information or what decisions these programs are being told to follow. So, one example, I started reporting on the role of social media in increased youth suicides back in 2015. And I knew you could see and hear that the problems were going up in youth mental health. But was only last year, which is 9 years later, that Meta shared data about how much self-harm and suicide content is on their platform, right? 12 million separate pieces in just 3 months. So they're not revealing the findings. There's no transparency. They're not legally required to have transparencies. So, if algorithms are black boxes, what other harms might be hidden?
Oh, so many. Like basically every problem and every horrific thing you can imagine is out there on the internet. There is a really interesting book. I think it's called Meganets. I mean, the concept is called Meganets, but it's by David Auerbach. And he makes the point that social media platforms are actually so big and so complicated now that the developers don't understand them, right? So there are so many small products, there's so many subroutines that no, even Mark Zuckerberg could not sit down and say, okay, this is how Facebook works, right? Uh, so, I mean, given that, like the idea that we would assume that there's somebody who knows what's going on every social platform, like, is not a safe assumption. Another work that I often turn to is a book by Sarah T. Roberts about commercial content moderation. So algorithms do process a lot of the problematic material on Facebook and other platforms, but there are all these edge cases that the algorithms can't make a decision on, right? So like an algorithm has trouble discerning between a pornographic breast and a photo of a mother breastfeeding a child, right? So in these edge cases, it gets referred to a human being, right? A commercial content moderator. And the problem is that all of these edge cases are just the worst filth that you can imagine. Just the most horrific, you know, images and videos and concepts out there. And so the people who work as commercial content moderators often, get traumatized by just viewing this unrelenting stream of filth. It's really, it's a
It's like
terrible
FBI
job.
agents. I mean, it's just a terrible job. It's
Yeah.
dramatic. So we've identified that black box tech products can have harms. You've proven extensively why tech designed by humans who are inherently filled with biases are destined to have built-in biases too. And yet, everywhere we go, everywhere I look, reputable people and companies and news organizations are touting the potential of AI. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's about money, quite frankly. There's this other interesting thing that's happened where innovation has become equivalent to technology, right? So when in the business world say, I am invested in innovation, I want to innovate, what they actually mean right now is they mean I'm going uh, to use more technology, right? And I would really like to see those two concepts decoupled, right? Because innovation is not the same as using more technology. Innovation means doing something new, doing something differently. And sometimes innovation can be something like not using technology, right? Like in schools, for example, I actually think we might have a little bit too much technology in schools because sometimes it's a lot simpler to just have a bunch of kids sitting around a table and, using books and talking about literature.
I mean, that's a complaint I hear quite a bit from teachers. Sometimes they are forced by their schools to introduce technology into the classroom, but it doesn't come with a tech support team. So instead of spending time talking to students, sitting down next to them and helping them review division, they're dealing with missing power cords, they're dealing with cracked screens and all this kind of stuff. So I think that makes a lot of sense to separate innovation and technology. You previously have written about the confluence of perception and marketing. What role do those things play here? And also how, can you talk a little bit about the idea of risk assessment and sort of what risk assessment we're doing or not doing?
Well, I got really obsessed with the perception of risk in everyday life a few years ago. Well, actually, many years ago now, because I got obsessed with it when my son was little, and I realized I was worried about all of these things that were really unlikely, and I wondered, why is that? Why, as a parent, am I so worried about these extremely, extremely unlikely scenarios? And so I started unpacking why we perceive different things as more dangerous, and especially, why does this happen to parents? So one of the things I try and keep in mind now is that when uh, when people get scared, you can convince them to buy things, right? So there are a lot of forces out there that are trying to convince us as parents to buy things, right? And so there's this, you know, so the world gets presented as very, very dangerous. Um, And yes, there are dangers out there, and different people have different risk profiles. But one of the things that brings me comfort is to think about the world as maybe not quite as dangerous as I would imagine in my darkest moments. Um, and so one of the things that people are often afraid of is they're afraid of their kids missing out on technology, that their kids are going to be behind if they're not using technology in schools, that they don't have the latest technology at home. And the thing is, modern technology is really easy to use, right? Kids are not going to fall behind if they do not have an app for every single little thing. And in fact, like what is really useful for, especially for smaller kids, is physical media, right? Having a physical book, having a record, having a CD. Kids love pushing buttons. And one of the things that I am really fascinated by is this TikTok trend this year of kids getting CD players for the holidays. And there are definitely a lot of teenagers I know who have asked their parents for dumb phones instead of smartphones. So I'm pretty interested in the resurgence of physical media.
Meredith, before this started, you and I were talking, and you shared a personal anecdote about wanting your son to learn something when he was young and then deciding it could wait. Would you be comfortable sharing that? If
Oh
not,
yeah.
I think that's really,
This was one of the many things that surprised me when I became a parent, because you know how when you become a parent you have all these expectations and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like I so I wanted to teach my kid to code. And so he was, I don't know, 6 or 7, and he had just learned to read. And I thought, okay, well, he just learned to read. Now I'm going to teach him to code. And so I sit him down in front of the computer with this program called Scratch, which is this really terrific, like, uh, learn to code kind of application out of MIT. And you kind of move around these blocks, and then you press play, and like the block does something. There's a dancing cat. It's very fun. And so I very quickly realized, so I tried to teach him how to use Scratch, and I'm like, all right, you do this with the left mouse, you do this with the right mouse. And I realized, okay, he could read, but like he doesn't really know his right from his left. And so he can't push the right button on the mouse because like that physical piece is not there. He hasn't reached that point of cognitive development yet. And so I realized, oh wait, there's a whole set of things that have to do with cognitive development that are necessary precursors to being good at computing. So then I waited another couple of years to teach him to code, and guess what? He's fine. He codes just fine now.
and that's why, Mama, we say we're working towards a world where childhood remains rooted in real life experiences and interactions, because there's so much evidence from centuries of research and experience that these real life experiences and interaction, tactile experiences, sensory experiences, physical development actually train the brain and body to be able to do more advanced work. And once you have those skills, you can do all kinds of other things. But if you skip that, and as more and more technology has entered the classroom, we're seeing a correlated decline in reading and math scores. We definitely support this idea of maybe getting back to the basics and making sure kids, have the building blocks that they need to go on and do other stuff. But going back to what we were talking about in terms of hidden harms of AI, there have been some pretty upsetting recent examples in the news about how AI has directly harmed children. Are you familiar with the case for the character AI product? Is that familiar?
Yeah, with
I
the
mean,
uh the
specifically the
character AI.
suicide. Yeah.
Yes. So in the character AI, there have been a number of lawsuits filed against character AI. And the product it offers a bunch of chatbots that people can talk to, and kids have been using these chatbots. And so one of the lawsuits alleges that the character AI chatbot uh, talked their kid into suicide. Another one alleges that the character AI chatbot, uh, encouraged the kid to um, be violent against their parents. I've also seen it in the context of, people talking about school shootings. So the problem here is there are a couple of problems. One is that the technology fundamentally does not have sufficient guardrails in place. Like chatbot technology, uh, AI technology that generates text hallucinates. It gives wrong information all the time. Uh, and there's no way to fix that. The other problem is that individual companies are responsible for putting together guardrails. And, individual companies are not really very good at imagining all of the possible horrific scenarios, right? So this product was released without guardrails, without anybody thinking, okay, well, kids are going to start talking to these chatbots and are going to get bad information from them.
I mean, if I'm following your arguments correctly, though, the fact that chatbots are um, producing information that can be harmful is not really surprising, right? Because
Not at all.
inevitably what we put in is what comes out.
Exactly, exactly. There's a project in the Washington Post where reporters looked at the training data that was used to train models like ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, Claude, all of the big foundation models are basically trained on the same stuff. They're tuned differently, but they are trained on everything that they can slurp up for free from the internet and everything that they can cut a deal with a company to, to get their archives to train on. So what happens is you take a whole bunch of data, you plunk it in the computer, you say, computer, make a model, computer makes a model, and they can use it, as we said before, to predict or to generate new text or images or video. And then it does that, but it hallucinates. And so then you have to implement this other program that puts in guardrails on top. And people are not sufficiently sharing the guardrails. We know from decades of social media that trust and safety teams are working really hard, but they are not capable of imagining uh, the horrific things that people invent or people do to each other. So, I mean, that's where we are.
Hallucinates is the word that describes what the machines are doing. I like labeling what the humans are experiencing, what the users are experiencing, and those hallucinations are really misinformation, right? For example, if a AI language model, scrapes the internet and gets articles that I've written, articles that you've written, and mashes it all together and puts it out and says it's under somebody else's name, what the user who gets that is gaining is not anything that has any accuracy or truth or trustworthiness. It's getting misinformation. So I hope, I when I hear hallucination, I know that's not how you mean it, but I feel like that word has been used to kind of cover up how severe the problem is for the users of the information, so the recipient of the information, because we're seeing even in schools where teachers are, allowing students to experiment with ChatGPT. And I'm like, why are they doing this when we know we can't trust the information?
Yeah. I mean, the idea of experimenting with ChatGPT kind of makes me laugh because kids are doing their homework with ChatGPT. Like it, it feels like it's the norm now. Like it's actually more unusual when kids write their own, uh, do their own homework instead of just feeding it into an AI. Like it's a pretty big problem on campus.
It's a huge problem on campus, and I think at Johns Hopkins, the professors there recently put out a statement about their concern about what students are not learning because they're doing that. So
Mhm.
we can't tackle all the problems in the world. And in just a minute, I'm going to open this up for questions. But before I do, I wanted to ask you about some of the remedies that you've proposed to some of these problems. And you've proposed remedies in a number of levels. So to fight against techno-chauvinism, you suggested we all get in the habit of asking, is this the right tool for the job? And I love that. And I'll say quickly how early after I was married, we bought new appliances, which was so exciting. And very soon they started breaking down, and we had to have the repairman come, which was very expensive. And in each case, it wasn't the appliance that broke, but it was the computer that had been put in the appliance. And got to know the repairman. He said, yeah, you actually don't need a digital screen in order to run a refrigerator. And sure enough, I've seen fridges that are, 40 years old that have a dial and the dial works well. So, asking, is this the best solution? I think is an incredibly simple, but an incredibly smart way to sort of fight back against techno-chauvinism. You also have expressed support for regulations such as the European Union's AI Act, which passed in August, and the US's Algorithmic Accountability Act, which hasn't passed. Can you just say a little bit about why you think regulation is important and what elements you think need to be present in regulation?
Well, I think Silicon Valley has insisted on self-regulation for many, many years, and it has not worked. I think we gave it a really good go. We tried, it didn't work. And so what you do when something doesn't work is you pivot, you iterate. And so now I think we need regulation. We need collective effort toward addressing the harms embedded in AI systems.
And what about this concept of risk and sort of assessing risk? You give an example, you wrote an essay and mentioned how if we adopt a predictive model for recommending movies like on Netflix, it's really low risk, right? Because if they recommend a movie that I don't want to watch, it's not a big deal. Nobody gets hurt. But if we're allowing children to interact with AI models, there's a much greater risk. So how should we be thinking about risk?
Well, one of the interesting ways that the EU AI Act breaks down AI risk is it classifies uses of AI as high risk or low risk. Right. So, facial recognition, a kind of AI, for example, a low risk use of facial recognition might be using facial recognition to unlock my phone. Right. It doesn't work for me half the time. It's not really a big deal. I just put in my passcode and I just go on with my day. But a high risk use of facial recognition might be police using facial recognition on real-time video surveillance feeds, because one of the things we know about facial recognition is that it's biased. It's better at recognizing people with light skin than people with dark skin. It's better at recognizing men than women. Trans and non-binary folks are generally uh, not recognized at all. And so what happens if police are using facial recognition of real-time video feeds is that people of color, especially women of color, get misidentified more often. And already over-policed communities get even more caught up in the criminal justice system. So that's a high-risk use. And one of the ways that we can think about AI is we can think about restricting or banning high risk uses of AI, and we can rely on low risk uses of AI. So it depends on the AI being used, and it depends on the context in which it's used.
Great. You're welcome to put any questions for Meredith into the Q&A, and I'll ask her those questions in just a moment. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about parenting and other things parents should think about, whether it's how to talk to your kids about AI, whether it's about gaming. I mean, one of the reasons I think that parents have been coming to Mama is because when it comes to our kids, most of us feel that no risk is worth their health and safety, especially if it's something that's not essential. So is there anything else you think parents should be doing or thinking about in terms of keeping kids safe and healthy around all this technology?
Well, something that I think is important is to talk about algorithms, especially recommendation algorithms, with kids. Artificial unintelligence is a really good primer for having that conversation. And I know people who have given the book to kids as young as 11. And they read it and they understood it. I mean, most of it. And so it's really important for kids to understand that something like the YouTube recommendation algorithm is invested in, or the algorithm is designed in order to keep their attention. And it's designed to introduce things that are going to be sticky, that are going to be a little bit out of the ordinary, because that's how our attention works. There's a really terrific piece I think it's in the Wall Street Journal, about the TikTok algorithm and how the TikTok algorithm works. So reporters built a bunch of bots and had those bots consume TikTok, and they very quickly got channeled into the kind of darker side of TikTok. So the bot that said, "Oh, I'm a little sad," like very quickly got routed to content that was about depression, that was about suicide, right? So like this is what happens with recommendation algorithms, especially when you're consuming a ton of content, right? The Netflix recommendation algorithm is a little different than the YouTube one, because YouTube pieces tend to be a little shorter, right? So you consume more of them. Uh, Why are they shorter? Well, because that's the common wisdom that the tech companies have put out there about, what really works on YouTube, right? So it's a whole ecosystem. Uh, it is not, it's not beyond us to understand, but we do have to work a little bit to understand it. And ultimately, it's math, and lots of people have math anxiety, which is very real. What I like my students to know is that uh, if you were okay with the math you had through about sixth grade, you'll be totally fine understanding all of the mathematical concepts that are in today's technology.
I love the idea of talking to children about these algorithms. And also, one of the things that I think a lot about is sort of what cognitive load our kids can carry. And I fear that one of the things that has contributed to the National Emergency in Youth Mental Health is that we have given children products that are designed in a way that makes them not safe. And they've been designed to be addictive. And then we tell them not to use them, or we tell them, oh, but this is how it's trying to manipulate you and you shouldn't use it. And I think that that's not fair to kids. It's really a tough thing. So it's like I try with my own kids and it's almost impossible, but to try to simultaneously educate them about these things and also remove the burden that we put on them. Some of these concepts are very new to people who don't work in those fields. And we have a question from the audience asking if you could explain what a hallucination is in the context of AI. Can you help?
Sure. So a hallucination is something that the machine makes up, right? So AI is a machine and it's doing math, right? A computer, like we kind of think about computers as these very complicated things, but ultimately it's a machine that does math, right? It's incredible that we have been able to turn, the real world into math. But ultimately, the computer is just a machine that's doing math, and it's not going to get everything right all the time. So a hallucination, we can think of it when we think about generating text, right? So you know how you can go to ChatGPT and you can say, write me a screenplay about two people who fall in love, and it will write a screenplay about two people who fall in love. Well, the reason it's doing that is because it's been trained on millions and millions of screenplays, some of which are quite likely protected by copyright. And because it's seen so many examples of screenplays in the past, it can mathematically predict what is the next letter in a sequence. You build up enough letters, it becomes a word, right? A word is delineated by spaces, right? And if you have X number of words, then it gets followed by a punctuation mark, right? And so what the computer is doing is called next token prediction, right? So a word is a token. It's predicting what is the most likely next word in the sequence. And it does that. And you pile up enough of these and you have a whole screenplay, right? So the hallucination happens when the computer picks a word in the sequence, predicts a word that is completely out there, and the human gets this sentence that says something like, uh, there are aliens in New Jersey. Like, there are not aliens in New Jersey. Like, there are no UFOs, but like the computer can make this up because, nobody's overseeing it, nobody's checking AI outputs for truth. And so that is an example of hallucination.
Thank you. There's another question. How can we get the kids at university off of tech and AI? This person said I had to homeschool to get our kiddo off of ed tech. And I found a no tech high school, but I'm wondering what can universities do to get back to person learning?
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately. I mean, universities have these deals with ed tech companies. We Every university uses what's called a learning management system. And this is the thing that manages students' grades, that manages distributing readings for classes. Uh, often professors will give quizzes and exams through the learning management system. Uh, None of them work particularly well. Most professors have major beef with the LMS. I have personally been tortured by it for many years. Um, but the infrastructure to do it differently has also disappeared. Right. So when I went to college, we had these things called course packs, which were these, the professor would take the readings to the copy shop, and the copy shop would Xerox them and then put them together into a course pack, and then the students would go to the copy shop and buy the course pack, and that was how the readings were distributed. And the copy shop also handled the copyright uh, issues associated with every reading. Well, now everybody puts the readings onto the LMS, onto, Canvas or Brightspace or Blackboard or whatever. And authors are no longer getting that revenue from the copyright payments, which is bad for authors. As an author, I'm not excited about that. And like there aren't copy shops anymore, right? There used to be like a copy shop, every few blocks on campus, but they just don't exist anymore. So it's not clear to me how we could, uh, like how universities could go back.
I mean, I can't speak at all to the university level, but I know, just as many tech execs opt to send their children to Waldorf schools where they don't use technology and they play outside all day, for schools to reduce the amount of technology, they're going to have to make a decision on what they do. At my own children's schools, I've been in parent-teacher conferences where they're using Google Classroom, and the teacher says, "Oh, I hate Google Classroom. I wish I could just give them a notebook." And I'm like, "Well, actually, you can. You're allowed to." So I think it's sort of a cultural thing, and that many in our education system, just like the rest of us, sort of are enticed by this promise of, how technology will revolutionize things and always be the best solution. I think it was artificial intelligence where you give the example of the research you did to find out why students weren't doing better at standardized tests, and all of your research led you to the fact that the textbooks were sitting in a closet and the children had never been issued the books. So,
Yeah.
what I think about, and this person wanted you to know that Finland is actually getting off of computers in their universities. They're making that decision. But anyway, there's a choice. And for me, I hope that we see, especially at the younger levels, that students get more time to learn without the screen so that they develop all those building blocks that they need. Um,
I mean, in my own classes, I do a mix of physical media and online media. I mean, I teach students how to make interactive journalism. So the idea that I would be completely offline, I mean, it's just not possible. Uh, but we do read books sometimes. And when we do read books, it's really nice to sit around the table with our physical copies. And, if everybody has the same edition, we can say, all right, let's look at page 43. And we can look at page 43 and we can see the paragraph together. And like, it just has a nice pace. So, the
to
right tool for the task in the classroom.
There you go. So, can we just talk quickly? Sort of my last question is about video games and the differences in different types of video games. Is there anything that people should be thinking about, or what's a good way for parents to sort of assess how children might be affected by video games? Certainly in the news, we've seen some reports recently about a problem with the chat on games, with pedophiles looking for children. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is something that I talk with my friends about all the time. I was unprepared as a parent to kind of be a parent in video game world. And so I think that it's important to think about video games the same way that you think about a playground, right? So I would not personally send my small child into a playground that I was not familiar with by himself, right? Without supervision. Like I would go with him to the playground. I would check out the other people on the playground. Like I would make sure there's no broken glass. Like That's just how I would do it. And so when you're sending your kid into a video game space that has open chat with randoms, it's like sending them into a playground that you haven't sussed out by themselves that is full of broken glass, right? So uh, there are different kinds of cooperative play in video games. So Minecraft, for example, you can play it by yourself, you can play it with somebody in the room, or you can play it on a private server, or you can play it on a public server, right? So the public server is where, all the randoms are hanging out. The private server, maybe there is another parent at your child's school who, is running their own Minecraft server. Like then you have more control over who's allowed in that digital playground. And then obviously when your kid is playing by themselves, uh, just on their device without, doing cooperative play, they're just by themselves. And when they are just with their buddy in the room, you need to make sure that they're only playing, in the room, that they're not on a public server. But it was surprising to me that I needed to educate myself about how video games work socially and structurally, and that I had to make rules about it.
Very helpful. So we have time for one last question from the audience, and it's completely changing topics, and it's a tough question. So if you don't have an answer at the ready, I
Uh-oh.
understand. But how do you see the future after AI? What do you think is the next threat that we need to be thinking about?
Uh, I mean, I I do not think that there is a technology out there that is a total game changer, right? AI is not even actually a game changer. It's very popular right now and people are talking about it a lot, but actually we've been working on this exact thing since the 1960s, and this current wave of AI is is an iteration of a discovery that was made at the late 80s, right? So it's not new. Like, is it groundbreaking? I mean, it won't seem like that in 20 years. Or maybe it will be. I don't know. Uh, after AI, I think we're going to see incremental change the same way that we've seen incremental change thus far. Uh, so tech companies really like to talk about the next big thing. They like to make you think that every single new release is going to be groundbreaking. I am I am unfortunately old now, and I am old enough to remember that this particular rhetoric has been presented to us over and over and over again.
And again and again
So
and again and
yeah,
again.
I mean, the stuff they're saying about AI, it's the same stuff people were saying about the internet. It's the same stuff people are saying about the web. It's the same stuff people are saying about Web 2.0. Like, you don't need to believe everything.
So before we leave tonight, I want to leave everyone here with one more idea from Meredith. Meredith, wrote that if we give up the idea that it is possible to create a machine that does all the work for us, we can design systems in which the machine does a lot of the work, but meaningful human work and meaningful human interaction are prioritized. I personally couldn't agree more. So thank you so much for being here, Meredith. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining us. Many of you will be receiving a copy of Meredith's book, and I hope you will read it and share it with your friends. You can join us in fighting back against media addiction, and as Meredith said, help us prioritize meaningful human work and relationships by signing up at joinmama.org. And please stay tuned to our channels and our newsletters to learn about next month's guest. Thank you all for joining us tonight.